Can you deliver both the curriculum and have happy children? That's the challenge facing all primary teachers. If the critics are right, academic pressure on young children demands too much, too soon. Is that true? And if so, what should be done about it? Hello and welcome to the big debate. Primary education is under scrutiny, even under fire. The reason, a growing fear that young children are wilting under academic pressure and that it's harming both their education and their lives. At stake are three fundamental issues. At what age do you begin formal education? How should teachers deliver it effectively? And how do you measure children's progress? It's a debate that goes back 40 years. In 1967, the Plowden Report revolutionised primary education. Out went instruction focused on specific subjects. In came child-centred teaching, more tailored to children's mental and physical development. After the Plowden Report, the battle lines were drawn between progressive and traditional teaching. When Labour took office in 1997, it sought a third way, which drew on both approaches. The result? For the first time ever, a national primary strategy focusing on achieving specific academic targets. Today, children in Britain's primary schools are indeed more literate and more numerate. They're also among the most monitored, assessed and tested in the world. In the first 6 years of compulsory education, children will take 2 formal tests, sitting 4 subjects comprising 12 separate tasks or papers. Linked to the tests, various forms of ongoing assessment, school inspections and league table places. It all adds up to one thing: pressure on everyone involved, and the children, of course, can't escape. Scientists now tell us that primary-age children are suffering clinical depression. They also tell us that current educational provision seems to be in conflict with the ways in which young minds actually develop. Campaigners, meanwhile, point to alternative models of teaching, often in other countries, where children start formal education at a much later age. Now, a new independent primary education review under Professor Robin Alexander offers a chance for change. Joining me in the big debate is a distinguished group of primary education practitioners and policymakers. And in our audience, a diverse range of teachers, practitioners, scientists and parents, all, no doubt, with much to say. Professor Alexander, another review? Why?
Why not? The last big review of primary education was Plowden in '67. As you mentioned, since then there have been a number of inquiries, but nothing as comprehensive as we propose. Meanwhile, the world has changed enormously. Education has changed. We've had 20 years of reform since the Education Reform Act of '88. We've had 10 years of non-stop initiatives since 1997. There are all kinds of claims about the impact of all of this, but the evidence is, to say the least, conflicting. Meanwhile, out there, the world has changed. There are very big issues to do with childhood, the nature of childhood. Parallel with our inquiry, there's the Good Childhood inquiry, born of a deep anxiety about the condition in which children are growing up.
So it's an all-embracing inquiry.
It's all-embracing.
Sue Palmer, from things that you've written, I guess that you welcome an inquiry and have a lot that you want to have in it,
yes,
its
indeed.
Findings.
Yes, indeed. And getting some of the pressures of primary education off young children is one of the things that I hope will come out of it.
Mary Bousted, one could say that you had a vested interest because you're a key union leader. Do you believe that things really have gone wrong and an inquiry is necessary? Is that why you would want it?
Yes, I think the time for a really independent inquiry, such as Robin is leading, is absolutely necessary now.
Even though, on all the indicators, results are better than they've ever been in this country.
Well, as Robin said, that is contested. There is a big debate about what has actually been achieved in terms of standards. And ATL has done a lot of work actually in this area. So what has been achieved is contested, how it's been achieved is contested, and what the unintended consequences of dramatic centralisation by government of our education system. And the unintended consequences, I think, are quite severe. So we need to look at these things.
Kevin Collins, you played a pretty key role in getting the, as it were, third way going. Do you welcome this review, or do you think frightened it's going to undo all what you regard as your good work?
No, I welcome the review. Like Robin, I think that in a changing world, it's always important to learn. My big emphasis is that we keep improving, and I believe we've had significant improvement in our provision and our opportunities, and I'm for anything that will try and continue to improve the opportunities for children.
Robin Alexander touched on the individual child. So to what extent does the profession already take note of individual learning styles and the personal, social, emotional development of children? If you take a look at some of the programmes on Teachers TV, you'll see a vast range of teaching approaches.
This programme follows a scheme of work for Key Stage 1 children, integrating the science of pushing and pulling, language development and environmental awareness across the whole day. Christine plans first to test the concepts of pushing and pulling in the classroom, using toys and wooden rollers. Then reinforce the children's understanding in small groups in the playground. And finally, reinforce the concepts within story time at the end of the day.
Today, a representative from Bentley Motors has been invited to talk to Year 3 pupils about car design.
Got the four-door version.
Teaching staff want to root the children's appreciation of literacy in the reality of their own world.
I want you to kind of think about seeing a car for the first time. And when you see it, describe to me very carefully what it looks like. So you've got to get the reader's interest. Off you go.
Right, do you remember Eddie? Yeah. Eddie is thinking of a shape with 4 sides. So can you find a shape on your fans that's got 4 sides? And when you've got it, hide it behind your back. 3, 2, 1, show me. Oh, fantastic. Do you know what? I can see 2 different shapes. We need some more information. So can you turn to the person next to you and think of a question to ask Eddie? Who can think of a question?
Rectangle has 2 sides right and don't but it must be a square, not a rectangle. It must be a square.
Right, so how are we going to find out?
We often differentiate activities for different groups, and the children all move at their own pace, but they're all being challenged constantly.
One at a time.
Brettenham promotes a range of sports beyond the traditional games-based curriculum. Archery, climbing, scaling the heights of an artificial wall. Such activities stimulate children's sense of adventure and encourage those who might otherwise be reluctant to take part.
One at a time, you're going to play a rally.
They've been challenged by adults who ask key questions. They've been challenged by adults who are talking about performance and improving performance all the time. And the children really, really thrive on it.
Looking at that, you get the clear impression that the teachers there are pursuing learning goals with their students, tailoring them to the interests and knowledge and experience of individual children. Mary Bastard, you wouldn't get the impression, which is, I think, your sort of view, that these are regimented children, that they're having a rough time. They look extraordinarily as if they're enjoying the stuff.
Yes, my argument, and ACL's argument, is not that primary education is, regimented throughout. And we think that the government wants it all, really. It said excellence and enjoyment. Excellence was high standards testing. Enjoyment was a full and rich curriculum.
So are you saying, if you take that clip, just briefly, sorry, if you take that clip, would you say that's terrific, but the opportunity to do that all the way around the country is severely limited?
Yes. Well, it is limited, and I would say particularly in those schools, in the inner cities, where the pressure to get the test results is the highest, those schools are in danger of giving children a curriculum which isn't fit for purpose.
Kevin Collins.
I recognise those videos, and I'm the director for Children's Services in Tower Hamlets, a fairly urban inner-city area in East London. I recognise those videos because I see those kind of things happening in the schools that I work with and I support every day. I don't recognise a scenario where inner city schools are offering our children a narrow, tight curriculum. I see schools that are full of energy, full of enthusiasm, where teachers are working in tough circumstances.
Not over-centralised, not too regimented in that sense.
Well, no, I don't. I don't see that. I think there is room. There is room for good teachers. There is room for good schools to cast their own personality and their own character. And that's what I see, particularly in the good schools and in the best schools. I see them full of individuality, doing their own thing in the way that works for their children.
Sue Palmer, the clip that we saw, shouldn't that put your mind at rest?
Absolutely not. I agree totally with Mary that it's the schools that are under the most pressure, and there's two places particularly the pressure coming from. The targets which are being imposed by local authority, who themselves have pressure from government, and the schools are being asked constantly to keep pushing and pushing up the targets. And the second is Ofsted, which now makes its major assessment on exam results. So no matter how much schools want to give a broad and exciting curriculum, they're always feeling obliged to go towards the narrow and the focused on the things that get tested and the ways they get tested. And that isn't what teaching's about. Teaching is about a chemical reaction between human beings in a room on a particular day. It has to have a degree of freedom, and teachers need to be able to be creative.
And teachers don't have a skill. If you looked there and you saw imaginative teachers with skills, enthusiastic children, is that an exception to the rule, or is it simply not what you're wanting to see?
It was film, and it was cut, and it was doing all the things that we've all been told to do for the last 10 years. I mean, we saw all the little...
They're
doing it, and they're fine, and they're very nice teaching strategies, and nobody's got a problem with them. I love the paired teaching and the rest of it. But when you are only accepted as being a good teacher if you do the things that's in the package, which nowadays is what people are assessed on. Are you doing the things that are in the packages? And if you're not, then I'm afraid that's too out on a limb.
So, Robin, what do you draw from both from what we saw, which obviously is only a small piece of the whole film, but also from what you've just said? Where do you come down?
Well, on centralisation, decentralisation, I think we have to recognise that England, because of course we had a federal system as far as education is concerned, is actually going against the international trend. Many countries like France, which were highly centralised in the education systems, have actually become less so. It isn't necessarily the case, and indeed one might suggest it probably isn't the case, that the way to achieve consistent high standards is for a government to take control. There are questions about teacher autonomy, there are questions about teacher creativity which need to be factored in here. I would also say that I spent the whole of today in a school in West London, which was a quite astonishing school, facing all kinds of problems in terms of its surrounding areas, but an exceptionally high standard of teaching, excellent, outstanding from Ofsted. But it's a school whose teachers, to a person, expressed deep anxiety about the controls to which they were subject. Now, our review is actually, I've said that, but our review is not going to reach any kind of judgment on it until the evidence has come in.
Okay.
And my position is slightly difficult in respect of that, because I want to see what people have to say.
And let's put in another piece of evidence that may or may not be pertinent to your review. Because the one thing we do also know that there is mounting evidence of depression among young people, clinical depression, that is. According to the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, 3% of the 5 to 11-year-olds are clinically depressed. If those figures are right, that's over 120,000 children. And on top of that, GPs have now been authorised to prescribe Prozac to 8-year-olds. I mean, to the outsider, that's a stunning fact and a stunning statistic. Arguable that that's a product of what is happening in schools, Kevin Collins.
I don't want to make any kind of judgment about those figures. They worry all of us. They must do, because the well-being of children is the benefit and the care of all of us.
But you can't lay it all on the school.
You can't lay it all on the schools, and you can't certainly lay it all on the imposition of national strategies for teaching. I think that would be completely unfair. Having said that, going back to the centralisation point, what we're recognising locally, certainly in East London, is that the well-being of children isn't just about what goes on in schools. It's about working locally with a range of partners, including your health authority, the play provision, the housing, the poverty. There's a whole set of factors that impact on children's well-being.
When we hear about sleep disorders, anxiety attacks amongst children, eating disorders, etc., is that an issue which you, as a union, your teachers are telling you that their children are facing?
Yes, they are. And it's quite interesting, the amount of calls and contacts we get in the week of the Key Stage 2 SATs from teachers who are stressed to the gills themselves, and they feel the children are stressed. And
let's just saying, they're not laying on the children their own feeling of stress.
Well, they may be. They may be. If you're told as a Year 6 teacher that you've got to get these targets, and if you don't get these targets, Ofsted are coming in, and you're in the firing line, then actually what you do with stress, quite often, is unwittingly, you don't want to, but you pass it on. And it's quite interesting, the QCA itself 2 years ago did research which showed that in certain schools, children, in addition to the daily literacy hour, are getting 2 hours a week test preparation for the Key Stage 2 SATs in English. That was the QCA's own research. So, and I met a head teacher.
I didn't recommend that they did that, Mary.
No,
That's
no,
what we
no.
found them doing.
But it's happening. Whether you recommend it or not, you can't say these things are there, but, oh, that's not the answer inside my head, I didn't want that one. If they're happening, then why are they happening? And we have to ask those questions. And it's also interesting, I was at a meeting recently with a head teacher from Tower Hamlets, actually, who said to me, it's a fallacy to pretend that from September to May in Year 6, you're not engaged in test preparation.
OK, let me bring in Professor Edward Melhuish here. Right. You wanting to get in any case?
Yes. First of all, the increase in signs of depression and so on amongst primary school children is not particularly isolated to primary school children. It's across the age span, across the whole age span, so it's not a particularly...
I suppose people know, because it's young children, people sort of feel, more distressed at the thought.
But it's been there before and we haven't recognised it often. Now, with regard to the issue of whether testing is causing this depression, I think a lot of the anxiety that comes around the test phase, that period you just mentioned, is primarily the teachers feeling the pressure of having to meet targets rather than the children themselves. In one of our longitudinal studies, we've got data on the anxiety levels of children at various stages during the primary school period. We had 4 separate measurements across the primary school period. One year before they took their first stage national assessment, then at the time they took the national assessment, then 1 year before they took their second stage national assessment, and then at the time they took the national assessment. And you know, there is no difference in anxiety levels 1 year before the assessment and actually at the time of the assessment.
From which you could draw the conclusion that these poor kids are under permanent emotional stress.
Well, there's no... If the idea that they're going to have they're being prepared specifically for a test is increasing their anxiety level, you should see an increase at the time of the assessment, and you don't.
Let's just take a pause there. We'll explore further in a moment the tension, if it's there, between, on the one hand, the emotional development of a child, and on the other hand, the need for academic attainment. The questions before us: is primary education stifling learning rather than encouraging it? And does academic pressure on young children actually do more harm than good? Big question. Sue Palmer, can you really make the case, as it were, that we are stifling the development of young children, young minds, on the altar of academic excellence and achievement?
I think that's only one element. I think you're quite right that children's well-being is suffering, that emotionally and socially they are having problems that they didn't in the past. But I think education is only one element in it. There are a lot... When I researched the question over the last 3 years, there were so many other areas, such as problems with diet, problems with them not getting enough outdoor play, a risk-averse society, a great deal of very aggressive marketing influence on children's lives. So there's huge numbers of influences. And as Robin said earlier, this means we've got a different ball game to put education into. I do think that most of the stress coming from the testing and targets and league tables is on the teachers. And it affects the way they teach, it affects the sort of education children are getting. We could be doing an awful lot better for our children by this time in our history with the amount we know about education.
But the children are being, in your view, damaged in terms of their potential and their attainment because teachers are under too much stress in delivering what they're being required to deliver? Because
the curriculum has been narrowed, because we've got a very sort of linear approach to teaching which goes towards a test. Recently, an early years teacher said to me, well, it's no good, we want to develop their oral language, we want to develop their attention skills, but it's fast forward to the Year 2 test, the Year 2 SATs. As soon as they come in, we've got to start now on the phonics and get them going for literacy. We seem to have lost the feeling that we've got children here whose lives we're trying to not mould, but help to develop in a rounded personality, not just something that can pass tests throughout their academic career.
If Sue Palmer's right, Kevin Collins, that's a pretty severe indictment, that you're exacerbating the problems that already children face by a teaching regulatory framework which is undermining teachers' ability to teach properly.
Well, I think in all of this, we're obviously trying to strike some sort of balance, aren't we? If we cast our mind back to where we might have been even 15 years ago, I think it's pretty undeniable that context and that provision actually wasn't giving children the opportunity to develop certain key skills which equip you to be critical. The ability to read and write and understand the world and be numerate actually gives you some of the skills that allow you to take on some of the forces that Sue's described in terms of marketing, understanding a complex world. But it's got to be a balance. And I think we're constantly in the business of trying to strike that balance. I certainly believe that developing those skills gives children power and gives them the opportunity to really engage in future learning. So I don't think there's any debate about the fact that children need to leave our primary schools able to command reading and writing and other kinds of learning and be effective learners.
Tests.
Testing is part of that.
A necessary condition.
Well, I think good assessment is part of that, and testing is part of the assessment process.
Let me bring in the audience here. Sian Hodson, first of all. You're a parent.
I'm a parent.
And your child's been or is going through the testing?
I have two children, both in primary education, 1 year 4, 1 year 5.
And do you like the fact that they are tested, or would you prefer them not to be tested?
No, I want them tested.
And why do you want them tested?
If we do not test our children, we are not able to assess those needs, particular needs of a child. By continually assessing, and I use the word assessing as opposed to testing, we are able to determine whether or not a child is gifted, or whether or not a child is less able.
But for you, testing is, as Kevin was saying, is part of the assessment process, a necessary part of it.
Absolutely.
Jane Wilkinson, head teacher over here on the left in the back row.
I agree with assessment. I agree that we need to look at the gaps in our children's learning and look at next steps wholeheartedly. I have a big issue with testing and league tables and results. And when Mr. Alexander said about a divided nation, I believe that the testing and league tables are making a divided nation. At primary, where it used to be grammar school and secondary school, we now have that system in primaries, where you have the inclusive and you have the exclusive. The inclusive often seen as the bad school because the results are often lower. Parents don't choose it. We have half-full classes and we don't have the same funding to support that education.
Does that mean that you could, if you look at the bare figures, where we know that children, statistically, there are more literate children, more numerate children than there were a decade ago, you think you could reach that level without having the structure that you've just been criticising?
I think you should have assessments, but I don't think that they should be published widely. I think that schools should be held to account. But by publishing them, parents are making choices. Your discerning parents are moving away from the schools that they might not have such good results because of the children's wider experience. My school is in the top 5% for value added, and yet if you look at a league table, it is probably in the bottom third. We do a very good job for our children, but we have half-full classes. All that clip showed children doing wonderful things. I don't have the funding for that. I've got half-full classes.
Let me bring in Aaron Ajit-Saria, because you are also down here in the front row, a head teacher.
I'm a deputy head,
Deputy
actually.
head, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I fully agree that the education should be child-centred, but if you don't know where the baseline of that child is, which can only be done through assessment,
But
how
are we
can
using? Is this a rather weasel word? This word we're using, assessment, here, because it seems to be a way of. Some people are using it to include testing. Some people are using it in contradistinction to testing.
Yeah. I tell you about Key Stage 1 SATs. I feel since the last 2 years now that it has become teacher assessment. I find it gives teachers the flexibility. In my school, it's a 3-form entry school. Parents came in June and they said, when is the Key Stage 1 SATs going to be? And I said, well, that was done last month. The children didn't suffer. They didn't even know because it was done through teacher assessment. And when I say assessment, I mean it. And I actually think that we are not looking at the real issue. The real issue is not about testing or not testing. The real issue is about having inspirational teachers and having mediocre teachers.
And if you've got that kind of teacher, are you saying you can have centralised or uncentralised?
Absolutely.
You can have assessment, but does that assessment, because what we were hearing from Mary and Sue and from others is that you can have assessment, yes, but if you have testing at these key moments, you are undermining the teacher's potential to deliver what you've just been describing.
No, I think on the contrary, I think we're preparing our children for their future lives. One of the reasons why I find that at 16 and 18 there are so many dropouts, because they haven't been prepared for it.
OK, I'm going to... You'll have a chance to come back in on that. But just let me... I want to bring in a bit more evidence for the discussion. You'll all get a chance to come back in. There is only one thing so far on which everyone is absolutely agreed, I think, and that is that there is a huge amount of work involved, both for pupils and teachers, in preparing for SATs. It can be quite extraordinary, indeed, according to most people. If you now have a look at the lengths they go in one primary school near Wolverhampton.
Well, we've had targets, so that, like, one of my targets is to improve on my handwriting.
When children arrive at Manor Primary, and even at Key Stage 1, their attainment is below average.
Can you tell me some of the ways that we could write words correctly?
For that reason, they use target setting throughout the school, not just in Year 6. This Year 2 group is working with teaching assistant Jane Turner.
Look up there. We've got all our high-frequency words there on the board to help us spell words. Any other way, tell us?
In your target books.
Right, in our target books now, two of
Staff are very skilled at knowing what level a child is working at. Every member of staff is very ambitious for every child in every year group, and we target 2/3 of a level progress in every year.
Jane then feeds these targets back to the children.
My writing target this week is to be able to spell words correctly. Now, that doesn't mean all the words in our writing, it means some of them.
In terms of targets, the children will either have them pasted in their book or they'll have them stuck on their desks, and if you spoke to the children and said to them, what are you doing well, they'd be able to say to you, in my piece of work here, I know I can, but I really know I need to do this in order to move it forward.
I need to demarcate my sentences, like using commas and colons and stuff like that. Well, in maths, I'm trying to improve on times and dividing by 10, 100 and 1,000. Just to extend them and put more punctuation and that in.
Manor Primary hopes that by the time the children are in Year 6, they will all have a secure foundation to their understanding.
Termly, targets are tracked so that you can see how much progress have they made. Are they on track to achieve 2/3 level? If not, which group of children are not on track? And what can we do about it? What intervention programme can we put in place?
We do like SATs questions a few times each week. We do it like after a lesson in the plenary.
And Miss answers them and like reads them out, like we just get used to them. In the SATs, like you get quite a lot of time to do one of the papers, and then you can think of it until you've got the right answer, and you can like make sure you've got the right answer by going through it in your head and checking it over and over again.
That's one part of Wolverhampton Primary School's programme. Kevin Collins, ambition, intervention, targets. I'm reminded of Albert Einstein, who a very long time ago, I think, said, it's a wonder, or words to this effect, it's a wonder that a child's imagination survives education. And I wonder whether that isn't that sort of driven approach doesn't undermine all the qualities and wonders that are in a child's mind and potential.
I think it was Einstein who also said the trick is to simplify, not make simple. And what I quite like about some of that, I'm not going to obviously talk about that school, I don't know it in detail, but I think there's something about making it explicit for children what the learning agenda is. It's very interesting to me that some of the language you heard about writing, as an example, is helping children understand more about what they need to do and how the writing process works and what we do when we assess writing. It's fascinating that in the past, a great deal of the knowledge about education, how you do well in our education system, has been in the gift, particularly of the middle classes in this country. Here we are now trying to help other children from all kinds of groups understand better what you need to do to make progress. I think that's empowering for children. It's got to be done carefully, it's got to be done sensitively, but giving children the wherewithal to know what they need to do to improve doesn't seem to me to be harmful at all.
Mary Bowstead, you, as you were watching that, you weren't exactly happy with what you saw, but what evidence is there in general that that kind of pressure, if you like, or it's seen rather differently by Kevin as a way of empowering children, is in any way putting unnecessary or undesirable stress on the child or diminishing the child's potential?
Well, I'm not really too bothered about the stress there. I mean, those children didn't look particularly stressed to me. What I'm bothered about is, do those children understand when that girl said, I've got to demarcate my sentences?
Was rather...
and
put some punctuation in.
And the boy said, put some punctuation in. Now, before I became General Secretary of ATL, I was head of education at Kingston University.
Were you good at demarcating your sentences?
I'm quite good at that, yes. And I went round to lots of primary schools. Now, I was in some primary schools where children were actually getting targets copied either straight from the national curriculum or from the National Literacy Strategy and put on their desk as their target. And I went round and said, what does that mean? And they didn't know. And yet the teacher thought that they were doing the right thing. And we've got to be very careful that we don't confuse the language of the subject with conceptual development in the subject. And I think in that clip, there was a great deal of confusion on that.
Any thoughts on this from the audience? Sue Hallam.
I think the big issue, and in all the clips we've seen, although in many ways teachers were talking about the right kind of thing, giving feedback, getting the children to understand what they were doing, almost every time it was talking about levels and tests. And there isn't anything actually wrong with tests, because they've been going on for a very long time in schools, and teachers have used them formatively to work out what they need to do next. But the thing is, they've become public. So there's no problem giving children tests and then using that information to work out, where they need to go next. But once you've put them in the public domain and they're used to evaluate teachers' performance and they're used to evaluate schools, that's when you get problems. And the teachers, the parents get very anxious, and inevitably that feeds to some extent to the children about, how am I going to do in my SATs? It depends at age 11 on where you might go next.
Doesn't this run counter to a very strong view that people hold generally, that more transparency is important? Whether you are a voter, whether you are a parent, whether you're a patient, you want to know about yourself and you want to know about your children and how things are being done and why.
And as a parent, I agree with you, but I think that what we're using to do that has to be valid. And of course, test scores, raw test scores, only take account of an outcome. They don't take account of what the child goes in with. And the best predictor of test scores at any age is where you started. And of course, children start school with very, very, very different levels of skills. I mean, my son could read before he went to school, not because we deliberately taught him, but he was so engaged.
And is an implication of this that you would start the reading not in accord with the date at which you have to pass the test, but at the point at which the child is naturally evolving to that stage of his or her own development?
Well, I mean, ideally, children should be engaging with books at home, with parents from, sitting on their lap. Here's a book, I'm going to read you a story, but as they're reading it, the text is following. This is how my son learnt to read. And by the time they get to school, they're already familiar with that.
If you followed that through, Mary, to its conclusion, it would mean a radical reshaping not only of testing, but also of the curriculum itself, wouldn't it?
Yes, I mean, ATL has a very clear view that the current national curriculum is unfit for purpose. We believe it is predicated on a knowledge base which was okay in the 19th century, but is not right for the 21st century. And it's very interesting that at the end of our national curriculum, we are 24th out of 29 in the OECD countries for staying on rates post-16 in education. Our young people walk away from a knowledge-based, subject-based, academically driven curriculum. And it's also very interesting that the CBI and the Confederation for Small Businesses say that when our young people leave school, they don't have the skills which they need to succeed in the world of work.
Robin Alexander, can you imagine, as a result of your... I know you haven't got to your results yet, but embracing some of these thoughts which might imply a really radical change?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I'm concerned about, having listened to this discussion, is Mary's precise point about confusing testing and assessment. Now, assessment, properly conducted, is, of course, crucial to children's learning and their understanding of their learning. But assessment is or should be deeply embedded in the teaching process. That's why people talk about assessment for learning. And assessment for learning isn't testing. It's a style of teaching in which talk between teacher and pupil, particularly, is of such a kind that on an everyday basis, the teacher is able to gather evidence without calling it assessment, and certainly without calling it evidence, of how the child is thinking, to spot the misunderstandings, diagnose them, build on them. And it's a kind of seamless process whereby assessment, the word assessment is never mentioned because it is actually good teaching. One proposition there I think we would all agree with, which is that there is a clear and necessary relationship between thinking, understanding and language, and particularly spoken language. And historically we are not good on that. We define literacy as reading and writing, and talk doesn't feature anywhere in it. We do not have the same tradition in Britain as they do in many continental countries of absolutely good, clear oral teaching, oral pedagogy, and it's that direction which I think we might consider moving into.
Which takes me to my pause and to my promise that we'll be back and we're going to look at an example of Europe to see whether you can both have happy children who enjoy learning and successful results as well. Is there something we can learn from abroad? That's in a moment. Welcome back to the big debate. Our topic, primary education and its impact on children. And as we've just been talking about, the question of can we learn anything from abroad? There are alternative models in other countries, and they produce apparently happier children who also achieve high standards. In Sweden, for example, mandatory teaching of reading, writing and reckoning only starts at what might be considered the ripe old age of 7, after a lengthy period of preschool in which targets and strategies make no appearance.
Imagine a school where play and relaxation is paramount, where there's little formal learning and most leave at the age of 5 or 6 unable to read or write. A place where they learn almost exclusively through play and where they do things for themselves.
We try to get the children doing as much as they can themselves. If we can give them the trust to be on their own, they will take that responsibility. And it's a lot about social training, and training together with other children is very important. A very big difference between the English and Swedish system is that it is in our curriculum, it says it's not the child we should evaluate. It's processes in the school, how we do things. We should evaluate that, but not the child, which is a very big difference.
This curriculum is a slim document stressing core values summed up here by the school motto: challenge, discovery and adventure. Teachers are expected to deliver it in ways that interest them.
Maximilian! Oj, vad många! We don't teach reading and writing in that systematical way. We are trying to build a base for reading and writing.
These rising sixes play games with language 3 times a week. It's called Literacy Hour, but you won't find phonics, big books or plenaries.
Här står det elefant, krokodil. Krokodilen.
If the child is very interested in letters, of course they will write letters and we show them how to do it. But they don't need to.
And this relaxed, non-prescriptive attitude to reading and writing doesn't appear to hinder the Swedish pupils. In fact, it's the opposite.
Sabotage är ett gammalt ord. Kommer från ett språk som talas i stora delar av...
By the age of 10, they excel in literacy, topping the European League table.
Loppans gymnastikskor var nästan för små och väldigt utslitna.
When they start school when I was 7 years old, most children are very excited. Now I'm going to start school and I'm going to learn how to read and write and count and all this. So I think they're more excited of school. I think it's more interesting because they have been children up to 6 and played around and have fooled around and having fun.
A taste of the Swedish model, sort of manner from Scandinavia for you, I guess.
Absolutely fun. Isn't that lovely? It's one of the things that fascinates me. The OECD recently did, it's about a couple of years ago, did a survey on how much our 10-year-olds enjoyed reading, and we were rock bottom. We've turned it into a task. We've turned everything into this sterile, miserable targets, league table tests, children who can trot out things about demarcating sentences. But the joy of learning has just been completely lost.
So you can get through, pass the tests, 7, 10, etc. By the time you're 16, you want to get out of school and read no more.
And even if you can read, you don't bother doing it in your spare time because you've just been completely turned off by the whole damn system.
Mette Jakobsen, you are a parent from Scandinavia, but your children are educated here, so you've experienced both at one level.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I have found it extraordinarily difficult to send my children to school here. Mr. Alexander, you said something very interesting about talking with children in school. I mean, I have a 7-year-old who's in year 2 now in the local state primary school. There isn't any talk going on in the class. There is no dialogue in the class. The children spend most of their time sitting on a carpet, receiving instructions. They then proceed to go to their tables, where they sit and work quietly with their targets written on a piece of paper next to them. There is no fun, there's no enjoyment, there's no dialogue between the children and the teachers. And even more crushingly, as a parent, there is no dialogue between parents and teachers. We are only required, as parents, we're only required to bake cakes and man stalls. And that is really it. And we're not even allowed to go into the school. I'm horrified to send my children to school.
Isn't there a really big issue here of what's, by way of contrast, children enjoying reading and therefore carrying on through, getting very good results? And in fact, I think I'm right that in Sweden, proportionally, there are 3 times as many Swedes in higher education than there are in this country. And isn't the problem that what is being demanded of children by way of testing as now an inevitable product, unhappy children who aren't going to read for joy and therefore flourish?
Can I just pick up one point there, because what I would not like to leave at all is the sense that what you've described are typical English primary schools.
The last part of what
the point about parents and the engagement in schools, I just find it is unacceptable. And you're not getting the right kind of deal from public service. I'd say that right now. I mean, if you were a child in a school in my authority, I'd be with you banging on the door. So that is not an acceptable
Come back to the first
set of
point.
provision. The first point is, when you look at the VT of the children there, I thought that was great. I really enjoyed watching it. I thought that was exactly the kind of early years experience which I like. I see quite often children exploring and playing with language. I think the point made earlier about not having national testing when children are 7, but having it based much more around teaching assessment is a good move. It's the right move. I think with the big development in early years provision, which again has changed so dramatically, children's centres, early years, nursery, we do need to look again at the provision up to 7. We do need to think that through, because I think there's a lot to learn from some of the things we saw in that video.
That's very, very interesting, because that would also require a pretty radical shift in policy. Kim Simpson, you are a Montessori enthusiast.
Yes,
teacher.
very much so, and practitioner.
Is what you are doing at your schools compatible with delivering what parents and society wants?
Well, as a philosophy of education, I could say yes, but of course most Montessori schools in the UK are nursery schools. And what I've heard in this whole debate is that we're not looking at what's happening in nursery. And we need to, if we go, we have a film from abroad, because we say we've got to look there and we can see what's happening, which is different to what we're doing. But if you look at the good nursery schools in the UK, you will actually see this informal learning going on where children are active learners. And what they're active in doing is creating themselves. You know, this is what we don't look at. We look at what children can do. We don't look at who they are.
But this may suggest that there's already enough flexibility, to go back to something that Kevin Collins said right at the beginning, that there isn't too much centralisation, that you can, if you want to do it in primary schools, early learning, you can. You just extend it.
You just extend what's happening in nursery and stop taking children into formal education until developmentally it's the right time.
Sorry.
But you can't do that because we have early learning goals in the state system, which children have to achieve by the end of the reception year, when many of them are really only just 5. And it means that a primary curriculum is being pushed down into those early years. It isn't possible. And we've also now got developmental milestones from 0 being seeded seamlessly into these goals, so that it's even beginning to push down further.
But we could get rid of the foundation stage.
We ought to get rid of it and get to a proper primary stage starting at 7.
In the front row right here with the glasses.
My organisation, Early Education, we would totally applaud the birth to 8, birth to 7 approach, which is there, and actually is also there in Wales, not so far away from us, so we should remember that. But one of the things which is concerning us at the moment is the target issue is now coming to the 5-year-olds, because local authorities have been set targets that children will have to reach, or the local authority will have to reach. Very carefully said, this is a local authority target, and Kevin will know about this, not the children's target. Well, it is the children's learning which is being assessed. So that is quite worrying for us at the moment.
Damien Muntzi at the back here, you were nodding your head in agreement with that.
Yeah, what is extraordinary for me as a representative of Steiner Waldorf Education and business manager of the Brighton Steiner School is that probably for the first time in a diverse debate such as this, that Steiner Waldorf Education is sitting in the middle ground. Usually we find ourselves as practitioners of education and people...
You're in the middle ground as between what and what?
In terms of the diversity of... Well, no, I mean, even with the Swedish model, we're providing an accent of learning that's... is right in the centre of ensuring that the child is experiencing the rites and passages of childhood and the freedoms inside their experience on a daily basis. And if one doesn't have an understanding of what childhood is and what the child needs, then one's really on a high road to nothing.
Do you, Mary Bastard, you live, not only do you campaign, but you live in a real world of real policies and real political parties. Do you believe that this debate is going to open up in the way that it has been in here?
Yes, I do, because we have to move in this country from a system where education is instrumental. What do I have to do to get to the next bit? I was talking to a focus group of 26 form teachers last week. We do lots of focus groups. And they said that 6th formers doing A-level subjects, their view of learning now is, what do I have to do to pass the next module? A love of learning, a drive, self-inquiry, self-motivation. It's what do I have to do to pass the test? And we've got to ask these big questions, because it's no good measuring if we're not achieving.
Sian Hodgson, you rather like the idea of testing. Are you uncomfortable with the thought of easing away from testing on the grounds that children are actually damaged rather than advantaged by the process?
Children aren't necessarily damaged by testing. The time that we have a problem is when we are forcing children who are not ready to follow these tests. It's what's right for the individual child, and I think that's where we are failing children, because we are putting them in a box and saying, you're year 5, you should be achieving this, you're year 6, you should be doing this. You're a child, you develop at your own rate, let's try and encourage them to be children and enable them to do what they are physically and mentally capable of.
Kevin Collins, it could be argued, partly on the basis of what we've been hearing here, that the government's attempt to forge, as it were, a third way between child-centred learning and academic attainment is something of a fudge, and an awful lot of children have fallen down into that fudge which has been bad for them, and therefore radical change might be on the agenda, which will have to mean any government having to bite some bullets about this, sometimes conceivably confronting some parental opinion that likes testing, that likes league tables, with some of the educational realities that are, if they're right, are being identified by some of our audience here.
At the outset, I'm not here to speak, obviously, for the government, but I do think a review is necessary. I said that at the outset, as long as it's about building on what we already have achieved and not describing the past as some kind of unmitigated failure. I just don't see that reality. I also think it's really important that debate is wide and includes a whole range of people. I think it's fantastic we've got parents here and hearing their voices today, because it mustn't be a debate of the chattering classes of education. We do a lot of that, and we kind of love that.
And Sue, you would like a bit of root and branch in this.
Utterly root and branch. I'd love to see a slim document for a national curriculum, as they appear to have in Sweden, and I would love to see, above all, education unshackled from politics, because I think it's trying to serve the needs of politicians, which tend to be short-term and very uninformed in terms of children and child development, that's caused all the problems in the first place.
Final brief word to you, Robin Alexander. What are you going to take away from this debate for your review?
Make a preliminary point that Kevin's argument that we mustn't write off the past must apply without exception, and it must apply to the present government. It was a spokesman for this government which said that before 1997 was the era of uninformed professional judgment. Now, if we are going to build on the best of the past, we should be prepared to go back quite a bit. Now, as far as what we draw from this, well, we're gathering in evidence from a wide range of sources. I understand that this programme will be sent as evidence to the primary review, which is excellent, so we'll have all these voices. I can't predict the outcome of our review, but I do know that it is going to be extremely searching. We've got those research surveys, we're inviting submissions, we're taking soundings up and down the country, we're looking at official data, and I hope that we'll treat it responsibly. I mean, I've been quite careful about what I've said in terms of coming down on one side or another. I share the view that there is a lot wrong, however, that we need to take a radical look at questions of assessment and testing and stop this fixation with testing, actually, and start talking about teaching, curriculum and values.
And children.
Thank you very much, everyone. We have to leave it there. Panel and audience, guests in this big debate. It's been terrific for me as chairing it because it's been so interesting. If you want to continue the debate, as he's just suggested, Robin Alexander's primary review is still taking submissions. The closing date is the end of March. You can find details on the Teachers TV website. If there's perhaps been a lesson to be learnt, one of the lessons from today's debate, maybe it's this, that in the rush to teach the skills required for learning, one of our panellists touched on it, perhaps we've lost sight of the need also to teach a love of learning. Goodbye.